Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Jeff Carreira, and I am very happy to be here today with Chela Rhea. Chela, I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm very excited to be introducing some of my friends and audience to the work that you're doing. And for those of you that are joining us, I want to set some context for this. So those of you who know me and know my work realize that creativity is one of the things that I focus on. So I teach meditation and I teach spiritual awakening. I often speak about spiritual awakening as a kind of existential flow state, that when one is awake, when one is no longer inhibited by false ideas and by fears of existence, when one has embraced the totality of their being and the possibility of living completely and in an uninhibited way, they enter into a kind of flow with the outpouring of reality. And in that state, there's a kind of access to creativity that you don't find any other way. So it's something that's always been part of what I teach. I often speak about the goal of spiritual work in terms of becoming an artist of possibility, which means you begin to enter into a kind of flow with possibility that creates more and more opportunity for more and more possibility. So it's a topic very dear to my heart. And Chela is someone that I met 8 months ago or so. I just randomly, she happened to come on my morning meditation, and I noticed her and found out who she was, and we were in contact, and I found out that she's a creativity coach and a meditation coach, and that she was really interested in developing an online program. And so we've been working together for the last few months to develop it, and I've really gained a lot of appreciation and respect for her work, and I've begun to understand, I think, where she's coming from and what she's doing. And so it's a pleasure to be able to introduce all of you to what she's doing. So maybe with that little bit of an introduction, Chela, we can get started. Why don't we start with the present and then we'll go back? So you've been a musician and a professional musician for some time, nearly a decade, and maybe you could say a little bit about your professional life as a musician.
Okay, so I started working with international acts, touring around the world in my mid-20s, and that was a little while ago. And basically, I came from a family of musicians, so I was kind of always interacting with that space and really wanted to become an international touring musician. But I came across the opportunity very kind of spontaneously, actually, through just having someone discover me from a very not popular website that I had created for musicians to collaborate and talk to each other. I think I had maybe 4 members on this site. It was not a, I really didn't think it was going to attract anything at all. But there was a band called Coal Chamber that I had listened to in high school, actually, and a friend of theirs had pointed them in my direction. And I received an email from them, and it was really, it almost sounded a little spammy, where I got this email that said, we want to talk to you about your career. We have some important news. It was very strange. I don't know. Normally I would not respond to something like that. So I did. I called them, and anyways, yeah, it turned out to be this amazing opportunity, and I just kind of stepped right in, and I went from, working in a bedding store at the time to touring the world all in just a few months. So it was pretty amazing to start that way.
And for the audience that may not be familiar with Coal Chamber, can you just tell us a little bit about who Coal Chamber is, why it was significant for you to have the opportunity to play with them, and maybe a little, also you could let people know what it is that you play.
Great. Yeah. So Coal Chamber was an international playing nu metal act that I had actually been exposed to when I was in high school, and I'd been a fan of them. So it was really cool to have the experience and the opportunity to play with them. And they are from LA. I'm from Canada. So it seemed like such a huge jump from what I had been doing previously, just playing in local bands and small bars and things like that. So yeah, it was a great opportunity for me to actually get out into the world and become a touring musician, which I'd always wanted to do. And I'm a bass player, so I was hired to play bass for that band, and yeah, it was an amazing experience for me, and I was quite surprised to have that fall into my lap.
And how long did you play with Cold Chamber?
I played with Cold Chamber. It was about 3 years, so it was a reunion tour that kind of just went over the span of about 3 years, and we traveled to, I think it was 19 countries. 19 different countries. And yeah, it was great. It was, we were performing old material that they had written previously, and they'd been disbanded for about 10 years at that point. So they wanted to do the tour, but they couldn't have the old bassist join them on that tour. So I was hired to do that.
I see. And then who did you play with after that?
So after I finished my time with Cold Chamber, I was approached to play in another band called White Empress, who was founded by Paul Allender, who was the guitarist and one of the founding members of the band Cradle of Filth, who I had known. I'd been same thing in high school. I had a lot of friends that listened to Cradle of Filth and things like that. So it was really interesting to have these two kind of back-to-back experiences. And but this was a little different. Instead of learning the material that was already being played and was written previously, this was an opportunity for me to actually write my own bass lines and contribute creatively. And so that was really exciting for me.
And what was the name of the band?
It was White Empress.
White Empress. And
Yeah.
and then you played with one more band, I think you told me.
I did. So after White Empress, I played in another band called The Awakening. And The Awakening is actually I suppose they're called a goth rock band, but they're from South Africa. And the music was quite a bit different than what I had been playing. So the previous two bands, the first one was nu metal, the second one was very theatrical extreme metal, and with costumes and everything, and a whole concept and story behind it, and which was really fun, by the way. And then there was The Awakening, which was kind of just like a hard rock kind of gothic atmospheric band. It was fun. I really liked that one as well. Yeah.
And so total, were you touring for 6 years or so?
That is a good question. So I started touring in 2012, and the last tour that I went on that was outside of the country was in 2016.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition, because you and I have spoken about this a little bit in the past, but in addition to your sort of professional touring career, you also have your own musical project that continues now. I think you're about to put out an EP, or I guess an EP, and that project was in existence some years before you started touring with Cold Chamber. So can you tell us a little bit about your more personal musical project?
Yeah, so I actually started what started as a solo project called Sarasvati, or Saraswati, as many people would recognize it by. And for me, that was a project that came into being because I deeply desired to do something from my heart and without expectation, without needing to impress anyone, without needing to sell anything, without needing to do something that was in fulfillment of anything other than my deepest intuition and desire. And it was the best thing I could have done for myself at that time. And that was, I think, how old would I have been at that point? I think I was 21 when I started that project. And previously I'd been playing in bands where I had sort of felt a little inadequate, and I wasn't really feeling like I was able to express myself creatively. So this was something that was very important to me, to be able to do that and to have that outlet for full, creative, authentic self-expression.
Fantastic. And you're continuing with that project?
Yeah, so that's been going on for quite some time. There was a little bit of a blip in the middle when I was really busy doing the other bands, when I was doing the touring and everything else. I didn't feel as able to work on it, and that's another story for another time. There were some reasons for that, but I'm really happy to be able to do that again. And now I'm actually working with someone who has been absolutely instrumental, literally, in creating this beautiful expression of, it feels bigger than both of us. When we create together, it's an entity of its own. And I wouldn't feel even right at this point doing it without him. His name is Joe Waller. And he and I have created this entity, and it is the most important creative project that I have right now. And I think it will continue to be for a very long time.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you. And I've had the opportunity to listen to some of your most recent music and have enjoyed it very much. So if anyone's interested in that genre of music, I would recommend that as well. So that kind of gives everybody a sense of your musical background and the both professional and more personal creative work that you've done. And I guess, part of your story that's interesting in relationship to being a creativity coach and working with the stages of creative alchemy, as you speak about them, is that you were not, someone might think, especially, if you see photos of you on stage, or you see videos of you on stage, and you're in a heavy metal band, and people would think, oh, this must have been someone who was just naturally extroverted from the beginning, because you're just out there completely outpouring on stage. But it's not actually your story at all, is it?
No, definitely not. And, growing up, I was profoundly introverted, and I would almost go as far to say that I am more introverted now in some ways. But I've learned to really get in touch with my ability to express myself, and to also use socializing as a part of that. So I'm not quite as introverted as I used to be, but I'm very shy, and I used to be even more shy. And so, getting up on stage when, people see that side of me, and you're right. They think that I must just be this absolutely, totally eccentric, crazy, spinning around the room person, because that's what I look like on stage.
Well, just to interrupt you for a second, because I've taken the liberty of watching some clips of your performances, and there's nothing that looks shy about the way that you're performing. You're often, just moving with the music, and your hair is kind of flying in every direction, and you're dressed in, really theatrical, very out there outfits, and then of course your stills definitely present you as if this would be someone who would definitely not be shy. There's nothing. And so I found it fascinating to find out that the actual person that's not on stage was so introverted as a youth and so shy. So how did you find that ability to let go that way on stage?
Truly, that was completely by accident. So my mom was a musician, as I mentioned before, and she would often play shows, and I would go to the shows, and I would dance around and get really into it. And even in those times, I felt far less shy. I didn't feel like I needed to reserve myself because I was just so excited and moved by the music. And when I was very young, I had an opportunity to actually go on stage with my mom and her sister, who had a band called Siren. And they asked me if I wanted to sing backup vocals. And I was really young, and I honestly don't know exactly how young. I'm going to say 8. It could be 6. I don't know. But this was an audience of about 5,000 people. And, I got up on stage, and of course, my first thought was, oh my gosh, that's a lot of people. But I was so determined and committed to the expression and the beauty of the music that I was so in love with, that when I opened my mouth, I can't remember exactly what came out. It doesn't matter if it was great or not great, but I felt so free and I felt in flow. And of course, I didn't know what that was at the time, but that feeling was a driving force in my life. I wanted to keep engaging with that feeling.
So essentially, from that very early age, you had an experience of unleashing yourself into a kind of creative flow. Mm-hmm. And essentially that experience stayed with you to the extent that you now you're now making your work about inviting others into that same kind of unleashing into their creative flow.
Exactly. And, that experience planted a seed for me that just continued to grow as I grew, literally. And as I got older and as I started to write my own music and I experienced what it was like to interact with that space, it just became my first love, and it just grows each and every time that I experience it. But it also, naturally, I was very drawn to create from a space that was spontaneous. And I later realized, many, many years later, that was a little bit strange in the way that I wrote my vocals. When I would work with other people, they almost didn't really know how to work with me because my way of working was just, okay, don't play me the song. I just want to hear it this one time, and I'm going to record my idea. If I listen to it too many times going into it, I get into this mental space, which is very different than the spontaneous emergence of the creative process that I couldn't control. I couldn't control it, and so I didn't even want a chance to control it. So when I would work with other people, they would show me the song that I was going to sing on, and it was this exciting moment where I would just hit record and I would hit play on the song and just see what happened. I had no idea. I had no idea what was going to happen. I couldn't plan it. It just happened. And so often, even to this day, that's how I write my vocal melodies. Of course, I go in and I refine, and there is a process that comes afterward where I put more of my deliberate self into it. But the most exciting part for me is to listen as it happens and to experience it and witness it as it's coming through me. It's just, I can't even describe that. It's just a beautiful experience.
That is really beautiful. I mean, and just to interject, in a way, I have often described and experienced, one way that you can understand spiritual awakening is when the gap between the emergence of this moment and your consciousness diminishes to zero, right? So often, the moment is emerging and we are sort of habitually holding ourselves a little bit off that, right? So we're creating this buffer so that we can see what's happening and have a little bit of response time before we need to respond to it. And that's what allows us to feel safe, right? And when you enter in this kind of spontaneous flow state, it's like you're giving up that space, and so you're entering directly into the moment of creation, and you become one with the emergence of the moment. There's no more the moment's emerging and then you're responding to what's emerging. There's just the moment is emerging and you are emerging with it, and then in those moments of that kind of existential flow, that's those moments where you feel like, oh my God, this is alive. This is what it feels like to be alive. And the other feels like not quite alive. It feels like watching life, but not really being alive. And so that's what I'm hearing in your description, and a lot of why I find the work that you do and what inspires you to resonate with me. And of course, one of the things that it requires, and it requires it if you do it in the context of life or if you do it in the context of making music. And the reason why, other musicians may not want to create the way that you do is because it demands a level of vulnerability that people find very scary, because that gap that you leave feels it's like your safety zone, and if you give that up, you're being there's a vulnerability that you have to endure. So musically, I would imagine that feels like, wow, you're just letting it come out, and you don't know what's going to come out. And so you don't have that little bit of time where you can censor and make sure what comes out is good. You just have to go with whatever comes out. And of course, you find in the end, better stuff comes out that way, but it can feel scary at the moment.
And just to kind of add to that too, there's a lot of people that do exactly what I just explained. But there's another element that I would do that I suppose is a little odd for some people, and it's just to sing in complete gibberish. So often, someone will write lyrics, and then they will take those lyrics and try to apply a melody to it. And when I do that, the gap is like, suddenly I'm thinking about, okay, well, how does the phrasing work? And how does this? And what is that? And is it working? And da-da-da-da-da. And so I found that when I would just allow words to come out, didn't matter what they were, truly, they almost never make sense. So they're not genius by any means, but I have no expectation for them to be genius. I'm just trying to allow the sounds to come out so that the melody will just naturally flow. And then I can use that melody, and then later I go in and I put my thoughts into it, certainly. But it's a whole different step in my process.
So you're literally singing nonsense.
Yeah, complete nonsense.
So it's just words in random order to fit the melody. Fascinating.
Yeah. So it's.
I could see how that would be difficult to work with in a partnership.
The looks that people get. Oh, what are you saying right now? No, it's fine. Don't worry about what I'm saying. It's the melody. But
right.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. So the place I want to pick up on here is because we spoke about this experience you had when you were 8 or maybe even 6. But that experience was sort of mirrored again when you began playing with Cold Chamber.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be good to sort of revisit your later experience of a similar moment. Right.
So that experience, the second experience, it has quite a story leading up to it, and I'll try to kind of keep it short because I don't want to get too much into it. But leading up to the tour, I became very anxious, very unstable and not grounded. I felt very ungrounded, and I felt like I was stepping into something that I could not do. I was doubting myself, even though I was practicing every day. I was doing all the things I was supposed to do, following the steps of, well, you're going to conquer your fear because you're going to be prepared. And so I was really prepared, but for some reason, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified, which is...
I think everybody can understand.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, and this was, just to put some context to it, the first show we were going to play was opening for Marilyn Manson, and people that know of the genre have probably heard of Marilyn Manson. Even if you don't like his music, you can see that, for someone like me, little small town me, I was really nervous. I'm thinking, okay, I really can't screw this up. This has got to be perfect. And the second day, we were going to be playing on a stage in front of thousands and thousands of people. This was a festival in Australia. And so, to be perfectly honest with you, I was pretty nervous about the Marilyn Manson show, but I was very nervous about playing in the broad daylight in front of all these thousands of people that had all these expectations going in that I had to be perfect. I had to fill the shoes of the person that had played previously 10 years before that everyone wanted to see, but wasn't going to be there. So, as you can imagine, this was just like, woo, woo, like weights just bearing down on my shoulders. And I thought, I can't live up to this. But this was all in my head. Nothing had actually happened. It was just me building up the scenarios and the expectations and what's going to happen and what will that mean for me. And I just kept building it up until my reality, the experience that I was having was traumatic. I was having a trauma before I even stepped on the plane to get to Australia. So I was experiencing a very real trauma. And I actually I quit my job. And the story of how I quit my job was that I literally locked the door. I walked up to the landlord's house, who was above us, or the apartment above us. And I sat in their living room and I asked if I could call my mom. I was 26. And my mom came and picked me up, 3.5-hour drive. She picked me up from the store and I never went back. This is how panicked and anxious I was. I didn't know what to do. And I feel it's important that I really stress this was like abnormal amount of stress. And, I ended up, I went down to LA, I met everybody, and I was still really not eating. I was still not sleeping, and I was really nervous, but I was starting to warm up. Okay, these people are really nice. I'm enjoying the experience. But then it's like, okay, we actually have to go and do this still. And 2 days before the flight, I stopped sleeping completely. I also got really sick, and that was part of it, but I stopped sleeping. And for the whole plane ride, I didn't sleep. I'm also afraid of flying, or I was. Another fear I've finally conquered. But so there was like 3 days leading up to this show where I did not sleep, maybe a few minutes at a time. So I was in quite a space and shaking and all the things that come with not sleeping and not eating, on top of being really anxious. So fast forward to me standing in the backstage of this show. And I've got my bass in hand, I've got my outfit on, I've got my makeup, and I'm starting to really jump into this avatar, this person who's going to get on stage, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling in the moment, and I was so tired, and so I think I just kind of gave it up. I was like, I'm just letting this fear go. It wasn't even really a conscious effort. It was almost like I was too tired to be afraid. And I looked, and I grabbed the curtain, and I looked outside, and I saw all the people that were in the audience, and I was
about how many people are we
goodness.
talking?
I would say about 10,000 people. Yeah, about 10,000. I don't know for sure that day. I was also completely delusional. So hopefully that's accurate. And something just came over me. It was this unusual feeling of comfort and relaxation and trust that I was in the right place. I was still nervous. It wasn't like, everything was released and then I was fine. It was this feeling of I surrendered to what was real and that I was in the right place. And that feeling carried me through that entire show. The moment we got on stage, I felt so comfortable and so poised and so confident, which is not something that I generally feel very naturally in front of a very large group of people because of the shyness. And I just went into it, and it was like it was playing itself the whole time. I literally, I think, to be honest, I think that's maybe one of the only shows I've never made a mistake on stage. And it was just this incredible experience of flow. I felt moved by the experience. It felt like it was animating me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Wow. So I want to use that to segue and to share with everyone a little bit about flow itself, which is something I do speak about and teach about, because as I said, I see spiritual awakening in essence as a kind of existential flow state. So I got very interested in, something happened to me, and this wasn't that long ago. It was about, I don't know, six, maybe 7 years ago. I was doing an improv a theatrical improv training with a friend of mine, and we were doing a scene in which we were architects sitting at a table, and none of us were actors, and it was a little awkward. And we were starting, who's got the plans, and oh, what is this, and what it's little. What are you doing? And then it started to happen, so that we all started to kind of get into it. And I just remembered at one point, someone said, "Where is Franny? We need her." And I heard coming out of my mouth the sentence, "Oh, she just left for coffee. We should send someone to get her." And it literally was like, I didn't know where those words came from. They didn't come from my mind. I hadn't thought about them beforehand. They just popped out of my mouth. And it felt like that little scene that we were acting out together just needed that line, so it pulled it out of my mouth. And which reminds me of you saying it was like the music was playing itself. That moment needed that. And so it pulled it out. So later, when I started reading more about flow states, I read this beautiful story of Laird Hamilton, who's a professional surfer. And he was the first person to surf a really big monster wave. And nobody thought it was possible at the time, but he was going to do it. And he tells the story, from the beach, people were watching, and he just went into this tube that was, 30, 40 feet high. And then he disappeared, because that's what happens when you're in a tube that big. And on the beach, people were looking, oh my God, he's gone. It's over. Nobody can survive that. And then at some point, he shot out the other side, and people couldn't believe it. It was the first time anyone had surfed a wave like that. And then talking to him after, he described how he went into the tube, obviously terrified, like you were just describing. But he said when he went in, this kind of flow overtook him, where he felt completely calm, completely one with the wave, totally knew that everything was going to be fine. And he just reached his hand back and dragged his hand in the water. And somehow that gave him the drag he needed to be able to ride this wave without getting, tossed into, broken pieces. And I guess now everyone does that. It's become a technique, that people know how to do. And people say, well, how did you know how to do it? He said, I didn't know how to do it. It just happened. It wasn't something I decided to do. It just happened. And then I remembered years earlier reading this story about fire jumpers, parachutists who drop into forest fires. And there was this group of them, and this was some decades ago, and the wind changed and the fire came right at them. And there was a small group of them, and they were running for these rocks because they knew if they could get to the rocks, they would survive. It quickly became clear that they could not outrun this fire. It was moving so fast that there was no way they were going to make it. And one of the guys just spontaneously said, "Stop and dig." And there was a small group of them that just stopped, and they just started digging a little bit of a trench, and then they laid in it. And then the fire blew past them so fast that it didn't burn them, because they had got rid of all the burnable shrub in that little area. Unfortunately, the other people who didn't stop ended up dying because they didn't make it to the rocks. But this has again become a technique that firefighters use, that if they end up in a situation like that, they dig out a little area so that it's just dirt, and if they lay down in it, a fast-moving fire will go right over them, and they won't catch, because there's nothing around them to get caught on. And when they asked him, "How did you know how to do that?" He said, "I didn't know how to do it. It just happened. I just all of a sudden knew that's what we needed to do." And so what's amazing about flow states, and what's part of the promise of the kinds of spiritual practices that can lead to the sort of letting go into the flow of life, is that in there you find access to capacities and wisdom and ultimately I would say even compassions and cares that don't exist inside your mind. You know, the things that you know in your head and the skills that you have in your mind and body as a separate thing, and your capacity for love and care they can't match at all the capacities that you come into contact with when you are that let go. That's been my experience, that things happen when I'm in that kind of a flow state that I could never have done on my own. Just like you could never have played the way you did at that festival from your head, from trying to do it, you know. And we all know, like professional athletes, when they choke, quote unquote, what happens, you know, when they're playing well and they have confidence and they're just going, it's just happening, you know. But if they lose their confidence and then they start trying to think their way through it, it all falls apart, you know, because it can't really work that way. So part of what I believe is that our spiritual pursuits and our meditation practice, which I know that you're a meditation coach as well, they can help us gain greater access to the kind of letting go that leads to flow states, that leads to the emergence of capacities and possibilities that don't exist. This is part of what I would say it means to be an artist of possibility, because you start to get access to possibilities that you won't have access to if you're, you know, stepping back from the moment of emergence and trying to figure it out, and censoring and filtering, and that just doesn't give you the same level of access. So I would love to hear you speak about your experience of that kind of enhancement of possibility.
Amazing stories, by the way. Yeah, there were some things that came up when you were talking that, you know, I tried to let go because I really wanted to listen to what you were saying. But the example that you made about how athletes choke when they try to figure it out, that is, you know, a very relatable thing as an artist, as a musician. And I think that most performers of any kind can relate to that experience. And it's when you start to try to do what you do in your refinement process, if you try to do that during the actual flow of creativity, it puts a big wall in front of that flow. When you try to figure it out, when you try to direct it too deliberately, and when you try to control it, or you're placing expectations on it, whether they're yours or someone else's, it just chokes it out. And so, like you said, the meditation process or the meditation practice, and really learning to become an observer, a witness of your experience, is so integral to really understanding and practicing that skill of being able to step back a little bit when you're creating. And it really allows for the emergence of what I love, you call it the creative impulse. Yeah, which is always at work. But when we try to kind of put our hands in it too much, it doesn't flow. It starts to get stuck. And we probably, in many ways, we experience that as resistance or blocks, writer's block. We feel uninspired, whatever it may be. It could be in the context of writing or composing, or it can be in the context of performing, or it can be in the context of improvising, or whatever it may be. But it's all the same. Like, learning to do that is really what the most fundamental step in learning to create the environment for creative flow to occur.
Right. Beautiful. And so you're a creativity coach. You're also a meditation coach. You feel compelled to serve others by enhancing their creative output and helping them realize their full creative potential. Why is that so
For me,
compelling
it's,
to you?
There's so much I can do in my life with my own creativity and my own creative process, and it's fulfilling beyond words. But for me to be able to contribute in a way that is outside of myself to help others do the same, because so often we don't feel that we have the support, or maybe we don't feel that there is any need for it, or it's insignificant, or whatever the cause may be that stops us from really putting in ourselves into our important work. I want to be able to help people to do that, so that everyone that I work with can really express themselves fully and be here in this life, because I really genuinely feel that the purpose of this life is to be able to express creatively, fully, and authentically.
And I think this is another place where you and I resonate well. I often like to use the language of saying that, our fulfillment, the fulfillment of a human life, has to do with us making our biggest contribution. What is it that we're creating? What is it that we're giving to this world? I mean, that's really where, in my experience, that's where fulfillment can be found. And so part of why I'm so driven to the kind of work that I do is because I know it liberates people to make their biggest contribution. It liberates them from all of the false ideas and the insecurities and the fears that keep us small, that keep us, unwilling to see what's really possible for our life and for us. And anything I can do that can help someone realize their full potential, is beyond gratifying to me.
Yeah, I 100% share that with you, and you worded it so beautifully.
So, I guess what I want to go into now is, when we were preparing for this dialogue, we spoke about the work that you're doing in terms of the 5 stages of creative alchemy, and the way that you, in working with people, and maybe before we get into that, we could just say, what kinds of people do you tend to work with?
That's a great question. So, honestly, and I want to just start by saying this, because I think sometimes when you say creativity coach, people assume that you mean artists, only artists and nothing else. But, it is my belief that we are all creative. That is what is so incredibly fascinating and beautiful to me about humans, is that we have this ability to co-create and to be, a vessel for creativity to emerge into the world and to move from spirit through consciousness and into matter. And we have that ability to do that. It's like we ourselves are instruments that can be played by the universe. And I am so drawn to that creative spark in everyone. And so, as I usually do work with musicians, I've worked with everything from actors to performers to comic book writers and authors and, creative, what we would label as a creative person. But I prefer to say that all people are creative, and that I have certainly attracted my share of artists and people who are very in touch with and believe that they are creative. But everyone is creative, and many people don't believe that they are creative, and I think that's what doesn't draw them towards it, because they don't think that they have something to create. But everyone has something to create.
And when we were speaking about your work the other day, a little phrase popped out to me that I found really compelling, and that is, we spoke about your work as moving from being an individual creative agent to becoming a creative collaborator, and in which, in the first case, creativity is seen as something that you're doing kind of on your own. And in the case of the creative collaborator, there is some kind of active relational engagement with, as you said earlier, the creative impulse itself. And I would love to hear you say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is the big part, actually. So really, I think, too, what happens for a lot of people when they feel that they need to produce from scratch something out of nothing, there's a lot of weight to that as well. You know, that in itself can cause resistance. But truthfully, being open to the idea that there's something that animates the universe, there is a creative force that is within all things. It is the thing that makes the world and the universe continue to evolve and to create itself and to continue. There is a desire, a deep desire within all things to continue in some way. And so for me in this, my work, what I want to do is to help people to connect to that and to feel that they can trust that process. So they can trust that if they open themselves up to it and they surrender to it, that something will happen. They don't have to direct it. They don't have to control it. And just to get into that practice. And at first, it may not be easy because we have worked up all of these blockages and all of these walls to kind of prevent that because of the fear that lives inside of us, that it's not going to be good enough or whatever the fear may be. And so it is this process of trying to transmute that fear into trust and into love and into a partnership, a relationship. So rather than feeling as an individual, like you said, and you are an individual, it's great to feel that, but to feel that you are in collaboration with something else, something, a greater creative force in the universe that can move through you, then you start to visualize, how does that happen? And am I creating the conditions for that to flow freely?
And this is where, you know, your work and my work are essentially the same. You know, I could have said everything that you just said, and I probably have said it more or less many, many times. And in that sentiment that you just expressed is kind of a perfect encapsulation of a big part of my work and my desire when I work with people is to move from this sort of place of individual effort or individual efforting through life to a kind of co-creative engagement with the life process itself. You know, and that's what I this is where I would say your work becomes spiritual. And because it applies not just to creative endeavors, of course it does apply to creative endeavors, but life itself is a creative endeavor, and so is every moment of every day a creative endeavor. And so this really becomes spiritual work, as in the broadest sense of the word, for sure.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. That's a fantastic note to end on.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really wanted to have this conversation with you, and it's been absolutely wonderful. The work that you do is so aligned with what I do, and it's just it's an honor to be able to have this conversation with you, and I'm so excited, and I hope that your audience feels compelled to create something, and I know that they have it, and I'm excited to see what they create, and it's just a beautiful experience. And thank you so much for having me here.
And thank you again, Chela, for being here. And thank all of you who have been listening. I'm sure that you have found this to be as delightful as I have.